You can also push out the engines from the scenario creation from the control service, but a lot of times it's easier to do that from this installation itself. And the installation of the control service is very straightforward in the fact, and let me just kind of hover here, it's kind of blinking off and on, which kind of can be a little confusing. As I highlight the control service here, you can see that there's a little square around one of the computers. Now that's the computer that's managing the replication scenarios that you see going on. So it really should be more of a dotted line underneath that machine connecting to those other servers. Otherwise, again, if that is going to be one of the systems that is involved in the scenario, you can have the control service there loaded locally as well. One thing to note is the control service isn't a single point of failure. You can easily install another one or configure it in high availability. That's included with the licensing. And download any running scenario into another control service if needed, but only one can manage that scenario at a time. And then as I highlight the engines, you'll see that it then highlights the additional machines down there, where those would be the actual systems most predominantly in a replication scenario. And you can see that it can actually be done as staged scenarios where we've got one system replicating to two, and then even one of the other replicas is then even replicating to two additional machines. So a lot of customers may do, or you may want to do that for a customer if possibly if you wanted to have maybe a local replica and then an off-site replica of that data. That's a possibility as well. And then we also have tie-ins to PowerShell so that you can create scripts or run via command line, really anything that we're going to be doing from the control services. You can see everything from creating scenarios to controlling them, stopping them, of course, can all be done from the PowerShell snap-in that can be installed. So we'll go ahead and step over to my secondary box here where we can manage it. Of course, I could have pulled up a web browser local to that machine as well and connected remotely to my control service. So the control service on installation, really the only thing you're really configuring on install is if you want to use the default port, as you can see has been pulled up in my browser here, which is 8088. Or if you want to use a certificate server, you can tie into your own certificate server, or you can tie into, utilize our own self-signed certificate if you're planning on possibly exposing this to your DMZ or at least exposing it to something that where you want to configure a little more security. So from this interface, we see the overview screen for the replication tool. So as you can see, it can be managing multiple scenarios from this one interface, and this will just kind of give you the overview of the current status of those scenarios. Many times you'll just be configuring or managing one scenario from a control service, especially if you're doing backups into a customer-located rapid recovery server or backup destination and replicating that data to your central facility. So from this, we'll actually launch our scenario management applet, where we'll actually step through the configuration of the scenario. You can see that I have one scenario in here right now that's currently in a stop state, but then most of the heavy lifting that we'll be performing is done from the scenario management applet, as well as we also have a central reporting center in here as well. And then some tie-ins out to the web where you can pull up videos and things of that nature as well. So from the scenario management applet, we can then step through the configuration of the scenario. We'll go ahead and open this up where we'll step through the wizard. It's all wizard driven, so very easy to configure. We'll be creating a new scenario. You can also create a template if you're looking to deploy a very similar solution to multiple sites and just don't want to configure the same email addresses or something of that nature. It can help simplify the deployment, but I think you'll see that the creation of the scenarios in themselves is very straightforward. So most predominantly, you'll probably be doing a new scenario for each environment. We then would configure a grouping. And as you can kind of see from the interface here, the groupings would really be kind of to help separate your scenarios for management purposes. So as you can see here, I created one for customer site 1. You may even want to create it for groups of servers if you're wanting to break those up. Because you can even replicate from multiple scenarios from even one system. So that may be even one way that you'd want to break up your scenarios for ease of management. Even if you're going to have all your backup data going to the same repository, you could actually choose within a single scenario, hey, I only want to have maybe these 5 backups, or these 5 servers backups be replicated, and then maybe you can create another scenario that would have 5 servers. But we've also added most recently some additional features that can kind of do that automatically with a multi-streamed approach. It is WAN optimized replication, and it is a mini filter technology. So we are encapsulating the changes as they're passing through the driver stack and then shipping those over to the secondary machine. So most predominantly you'll be configuring a storage server or maybe just a share, and then as that information is being populated to that system via backup, then you'd be running either a periodic sync or a real-time replication to the off-site facility, or scheduled sync. There are a few different ways that we can manage the replication itself, depending on what the customer's needs are, or possibly to better address contention or to limit any sort of contention between the backup processes coming into the system and the backup data trying to go out. So possibly for this one, I'll just create a new folder, customer site 2, click next, and we'll see it kind of populate that information in the background here. We will be doing a file server replication scenario, so we can really kind of ignore this other functionality. We'll be doing replication for data recovery, and most generally you'll actually have these other features grayed out because really replication is what we're trying to drive here with this. So we'll be doing a replication solution. We'll go ahead and click next. So we're really just leaving the defaults there on that screen. And then we type in the specific scenario name. So this may be like servers 1 through 5, and then I'll choose my master machine. Now, as we saw, we are going to be backing up to that master server, which was local, but of course, multiple machines could be going into that master server. And then we choose the replica machine. So this would be the machine generally located at your facility that you'd be replicating the data into. Now, of course, you type in their IP addresses as well. The default port that will be used for data transmission can be altered as needed to better address certain firewall restrictions. And one thing to note as well is that we can also run the scenarios in assessment mode. This is an extremely handy feature for better estimating the possibilities or the requirements from a bandwidth perspective. So if you want to get a better idea of what type of bandwidth might be needed to replicate these 5 servers that you may be choosing in this scenario, you could then run it in simulation for a period of time, and it will generate a report that will be populated back to my central report center that will provide on a very incremental basis, 10-minute basis, what level of data would have been replicated during that time period. So as we pull up my report center, I can kind of give you an idea of what that would look like. So you just run it in simulation. You don't even have to have a replica set up at that time. So that's convenient as well, is the fact that you can just populate the master machine into the configuration, and then you can populate the master twice if you want, or I believe you can leave it blank for the replica machine, and then only if you're choosing assessment mode can you do that. And then when you run it in simulation by pressing the blue button when you're running the scenario, as I'll show you momentarily, you'll then be gathering information for an assessment report. So as we highlight a scenario that I previously gathered some information for and pull up one of these reports from the report center, and as you highlight a scenario, it'll populate all its associated reports in the lower section. We'll then show you on a 10-minute increment basis how much data would have been replicated during that time period, as well as if you'd had compression for replication turned on, what type of compression ratio you'd be getting on your data. Again, here you can see I ran it for about 6 hours. So on that 10-minute increment basis, as you can see, 35, 45, the amount of data, and then summary statistics at the end for what my maximum was, minimum was, average during the time period, for both, the original data set and then when it was compressed as well. So on the next screen, you can actually push the engines out as part of the scenario creation itself. A lot of times, especially when you're configuring a remote destination, you may have already installed it, especially if you're installing the control surface on that remote system. So as we previously saw, you can install the engines, but you can push them out to both these machines as you're creating the scenario itself. Or if you were it's also extremely handy if you're just wanting to verify that you can see the engines. So that if you need to make sure that they're in the same version, make sure that they're, if they aren't, you can upgrade them from this processing, and then also note the fact that you don't have to reboot for this installation. The engines by using a mini filter technology, don't require a reboot for installation, future upgrades, or if you ever decide that you need to uninstall the engines, it wouldn't require a reboot either. So if I needed to install or upgrade either of these engines, just make sure that they're checked, click install, and then just populate the appropriate account information to deploy those. And on the next screen, we will then browse out to the specific data set that I want to protect. So for this scenario, I'll be browsing out to that shared location. Again, for ours it was local, and then I'll choose the specific folders that I want to protect. You may have also created a backup folder here, and then you'd want to select it in its entirety. If you were to have highlighted the top tier, it will automatically include anything under that tier. So that's one thing to note as well. But as I'd say, it may be for a scenario by scenario basis, since we can break those up. It is kind of convenient that you could actually maybe choose 5 servers here, 10 servers. You could choose all of them if you like, and then you can do exclusions, but or inclusions, which really isn't needed. Obviously, for protection of the backup environment, we are needing to protect that folder in its entirety on the secondary machine so that we can recover. Just wanted to touch on that so that if you did see those, that's really predominantly for basic file level data. So if I were protecting like a file share or something like that, I could do exclusions based off file type. It recognizes wildcards and things of that nature. So I'll go ahead and select that, and then on the next screen we would choose the destination. Now we could alter the destination on the replica, so that I could replicate this data into a different folder on the replica if I so choose. I will leave it at the defaults here for my environment. I have created an E drive off of my replica machine. Let's see, did I map out to that? Yes. So as we click run here and go to my E drive on my replica, we'll see that I have already kind of pre-staged that data there. And that's one thing we're going to talk about here as well, is the fact that we have some great methodologies for syncing the data to your facility. We have a functionality called offline synchronization, which I'm going to cover in greater detail, where we can automate the creation of a snapshot on the primary production machine that you can then copy off on a USB drive, ship over to your facility, mount it up, and do a quick comparison process. You can have your customers ship you some USB drives that already had that data located on them if you want to pre-stage and you weren't worried too much about the comparison process. Maybe you're only going to be protecting a small amount of data. The offline sync really becomes beneficial when you're talking about extremely large data sets over smaller WAN speeds, where you could be looking at possibly days worth of times or weeks worth of times, possibly in many circumstances, where if you're trying to create that data in its entirety through the replication process, it would be extremely painful. Whereas in the offline synchronization, can speed that up, alleviate that pain point, alleviate the synchronization process as needed.